This is the Longbox Review comic book podcast. I'm your host, Eric. Today's episode is about the classic story, The Kid Who Collects Spider Man, from Amazing Spider Man Volume 1, number 248. And to help discuss that, I'd like to welcome back children's book author and comic book fan, Troy Wilson. Thanks for coming back on the show, Troy.
Thanks for having me.
So this was Troy's idea to get together and talk about a particular comic book, and he suggested this one, which I believe, Troy, you said it was one inspiration for one of your children's books, which was Perfect Man, that we talked about on the show back in July of 2022. And I'll have a link in the show notes for people if they missed that episode and they want to go back and listen to that, because we had a great conversation not only about your children's books, but also a bunch of comic book talk and kind of like your comic book history, as it were. And so I encourage people to go listen to that as well. But like I said, we're here to talk about actually a story in an issue of Spider-Man, not a whole issue, because this was The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man is half of that particular issue, and we're not going to be talking about the first half of that, which is the action story involving, I forgot his name already. Troy, do you remember? Thunderball, I think is what his name is. Yeah. Wonderfully drawn, I thought, by John Romita Jr. and Brett Breeding, doing the pencil breakdowns and finishes respectively on that. I because I took the opportunity Troy, to go ahead and read that first part, because I have not read this comic book since it came out in the cover date is January 84, which is partially why we're talking about it right now, because this episode will release in the 40th anniversary of the cover date. Now, it's a little over 40 years since it came out, because the on sale date was in October of 1983. So I bought this around that time that it came out, and I've not read it since then. I don't know what your experience was or has been with this particular issue, Troy.
I bought it when it came out. Definitely was buying this Spider-Man run off the stands at the time, and I have since read The Kid Who Collects portion of the issue. I think the last time I read it was probably in some best of collection, actually.
Okay.
So I have read it a couple times prior to this reread, though I think this reread, honestly, this read was probably even more interesting in the sense of me being a published author and knowing a bit more about stories and storytelling and how it's all put together. I found it really interesting in terms of all of the great storytelling choices that we can get into as we go, that were made. Obviously, my first reading of it, well, that was the one where the big twist hit the hardest, because I didn't see it coming. But it's one of those stories that I have found ages really well, and it's one of those ones where, again, for me at least, when I see, wow, okay, they're choosing to do this and this and this, and it actually improves in my estimation over time, as opposed to some stories where you start to see more holes or doesn't age as well for whatever reason. So I really enjoyed revisiting it, and I definitely know that I checked it out off the stands at the time.
And I just looked this up, at least from Mike's Amazing World of Comics website. So it was reprinted. This story was reprinted in Very Best of Spider-Man trade in 1994. So that was the earliest collection it was a part of. And then Essential Spider-Man Volume 11 in 2012, Spider-Man by Roger Stern Omnibus in 2014. And then most recently in a Marvel Masterworks Volume 23 in 2022. So I didn't realize it was included in any collection. So that was interesting to hear when you mentioned that.
Well, that's great. I'm glad people have so many ways to access it and come at it, and hopefully folks who are listening to this, I hope, have already encountered the story. Because folks, honestly, if you have not already encountered this story in some way, shape, or form, I hate to go, don't listen now on somebody else's podcast telling people don't listen right now, but I would advise that you don't, and just read it fresh and then come back to our thoughts on it after that point. But I imagine, since it's been around for so long, I imagine most of the people listening to this have already encountered it at least once.
Well, and that, and I hope, in case people are coming to this for the first time, because it is over 40 years old, maybe it's not as universally beloved as it is for people of our generation. And so hopefully if there's anybody new that happens to catch this, that'll open their eyes to, what a great little Spider-Man story it is. Because I think of this story as kind of iconic in a way. And I'll get into some of these reasons as we continue this conversation. But it is one of my most beloved stories regarding Spider-Man in my collection, and that includes the Gwen Stacy death, which was one of my very first comic books, let alone Spider-Man comic books. And
Right.
so, this story, which is, like I said, half of an issue, it ranks pretty high, which is, I mean, that says a lot about the quality and the impact that this story has.
Definitely.
Okay, well, we are going to, like Troy said, you may want to pause this and come back after you go read the story. Oh, I forgot to check. Are you aware, Troy, if this is available on the Marvel Unlimited app? I don't know if you actually subscribe to that or not.
I don't know. I'd be surprised if it's not, though.
Yeah,
I
in
I
fact,
honestly would be. Yeah.
when we get here in a little bit, when we're going through some stuff, I'll see if I can look it up real quick to verify in real time as we record.
There we go. There
But
we go.
we'll get into this. We're gonna talk about the issue and give a synopsis. So, like I said, pause and come back if you want, and then we'll talk a little bit more about various things about what we like about the issue. There's some trivia about it, and I think and Troy has some very specific things that he wants to bring up about the issue as well, or the story in some way. So, just to start with, like I said, this is number 248 for cover date January 84. This is by Roger Stern, who wrote it. Ron Frenz did the breakdowns, Terry Austin the finishes, and that's very important for something I'm going to bring up later. Christy Shield did the colors, Joe Rosen on letters, and Bob Natal, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, was the editor on this, but he was the what do they call it, Troy? The associate editors
Oh,
month,
assistant
or
assistant editor.
assistant editors month. Yes. And so I have a thought about that I want to get to, but this is an assistant editors month issue. And so I don't want to jump ahead. So, but I'm very excited to talk about this with a cover by John Romita Jr. and Terry Austin, and I'll start with a little bit of trivia that I found. Roger Stern intended that John Romita Jr. would draw this story, but it was editor Dana Tal who asked Ron Frenz to do it. So I think that was a really good choice. Anyway, so that's the credits for the issue. I wondered, Troy, if you wouldn't mind kind of describing the cover for this issue.
Sure. Well, what we have is we have the kid, as in the kid who collects Spider-Man. He's holding a big, I guess it looks like an actual photo, or at least I'm kind of assuming in a way that it is a photo of the action in the lead story in this issue, because it's Spider-Man versus Thunderball. So he's holding that out, so we can see that he's holding it out in front of him, but he's actually turned back a little bit, because behind him we can tell is Spider-Man, and we can only tell that because it's Spider-Man's hand is on his shoulder, and so he's kind of, we can't see any more than the hand, and Tim's kind of looking back, sort of towards Spider-Man, but also kind of like looking out almost at us too, in a way. And it's an interesting interesting cover because, of course, this gives you a little taste of what Romita Jr. might have done with the story in terms of what Tim would have looked like under his hand and so forth, and maybe a little bit of the feel in a way, because you certainly get a sense in Tim's expression, like sort of the happiness and wonder, regarding wow, this hand on my shoulder here, it's Spider-Man's hand, and all that. You get that sense in the story too at certain points when he's just bowled over by the real Spider-Man is actually visiting him.
Yeah, I took that to be a poster, like a young kid would stick up a poster of their favorite movie or character from something.
Right, right.
But yeah, I mean, you described that perfectly. And yeah, I hadn't thought about that before. Yeah, we do get a sense of what Romita Jr. would have done with this. Romita Jr. and Austin would have done with this. So yeah, that's interesting. I'd be interested to contrast that with what we get from Friends and Austin. I did look it up, Troy.
Mhm.
This issue is on Marvel Unlimited, and it is so weird to, as I'm scrolling through the pages just real quickly, to see how white the pages are and how the colors really pop off the page in
Right,
contrast compared to my original issue, which is, more or less off white.
right. Yeah, yeah.
From the paper stock of and the age of it as well. Yeah, that's
Well,
really interesting.
that is interesting, and it'd be an open question as to what kind of effect works better for the story too. Some, because obviously there are points in the story where the brighter popping out stuff is works really well, and then others where I'm not sure it does. So
Yeah, and I will say to that specifically, just looking at that first page of the story, that you get a better sense in the original issue to me that it's nighttime. It's dark outside. It's dark, somewhat dark in the room, and
right.
whereas in the digital issue, it's much brighter.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
you kind
yeah.
of lose the ambiance a bit
Hmm.
in the digital version. But anyway, yeah, I don't think I have anything else really to say about the cover. I just I really like the composition of it. I like how it encompasses both stories in a way that I think is a bit innovative in a sense. And yeah, it was really done really well.
Agreed, agreed. Yeah, I really like it.
All right. Well, okay. So, what is this story about? This 11-page story in this issue, and so there we have a somewhat brief synopsis that we'll read to you, just in case you haven't found your issue or went to the Marvel Unlimited app and looked it up. So, Troy, would you do the honors and start us out?
Will do. After reading an article in the Daily Bugle about Timothy Harrison, the kid who collects Spider-Man, Spider-Man visits the 9-year-old. After demonstrating that Spider-Man is indeed your friendly neighborhood wall crawler, he tells Tim about the article and asks to see Tim's collection. After showing Spider-Man a scrapbook with perhaps the first article about Spider-Man, Tim asks Spider-Man how he got his powers, and Spider-Man obliges. He also shows Tim one of his web shooters and makes a web swing for Tim.
Tim asks why Spider Man started chasing crooks after starting out on television. Spider Man replies, I was afraid you might ask that. He tells Tim about the crook who shot someone he cared about. He says, maybe you should have picked someone else to start a scrapbook about. Tim tells him, at least you tried to make up for it, and wants to show Spider Man more of his collection. In fact, Tim had dug some bullets out of a bank building where Spider Man stopped some thieves, giving Spider Man a reason to tell Tim about his spider sense. Tim then shows Spider Man a newer scrapbook with newspaper retractions, such as the time J. Jonah Jameson had to retract his accusation that Spider Man was Electro.
Spider-Man announces it's time to go, and Tim needs his sleep. As he gets to the window to leave, Tim asks Spider-Man if he'll tell him who he really is. Spider-Man tells him that revealing his identity puts people at risk. Tim tells him, but I'll never tell another soul that I knew as long as I lived. Spider-Man says, I believe you, Tim, but I can't. Spider-Man stands silently for a moment. and then turns around, pulling his mask off. He faces Tim and says, "My name is Peter Parker." Tim is amused that J. Jonah Jameson has been paying Peter for all the pictures of Spider-Man and wished he could tell the publisher. Spider-Man reminds him that he can't. Tim tells Peter not to worry. "It's our secret, forever and ever. I promise." Spider-Man hugs Tim, telling him they're buddies now. Peter puts his mask back on and tells Tim to take care of himself as he leaves.
Outside, Spider Man stands on a wall, his face in his hand, and then he swings away, revealing that Tim is at a cancer center. The story ends with the last part of the Bugle article. When I asked him what he wanted more than anything else, he looked me square in the eye and said, "Mr. Conover, I'd like to meet Spider Man and talk to him, just for a few minutes." Well, I hope Tim gets his wish. I hope that somewhere out there, Spider Man reads these words. I hope that my publisher is wrong about him and that he takes the time to visit a very brave young man named Tim Harrison. And I hope he does it soon. You see, Tim Harrison has leukemia, and the doctors only give him a few more weeks to live. The end. All right, Troy, why did you pick such a downer of a story to talk about today?
Well, it is a downer, no question. But
Well, it is and it isn't, right?
yeah. It is and it isn't, because, well, I think I mean it's one of those bittersweet stories, because Tim got this amazing moment. He's been collecting all this Spider-Man stuff, the films, and digging the bullets out of walls and these clippings, and arranging these clippings in different categories of scrapbooks. And he's been doing all this stuff and loves Spider-Man, obviously. And so it is wonderful that Spider-Man has taken the time to tell him all this stuff, show him all this stuff, and that's a wonderful thing, that essentially it's someone's dying wish and they get their dying wish. But of course it's bittersweet because they are dying and they're going to pass on. And of course the death of a kid is certainly even more tragic than that. But I think more than anything, the reason I chose it is because, in terms of like the storytelling, Stern and Company, I mean, they have something that is going to be a tearjerker just by its very nature. If you have a kid getting his dying wish to see Spider-Man, has cancer and so forth, I mean, it's going to be a tearjerker, even if it's poorly constructed, even if it's poorly done.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those stories that it could almost rest on the laurels of its concept in a way, but it doesn't. I mean, the beauty of it is that it doesn't just go for the easy emotional impact, and I mean, they take the care to tell it so well, and so smartly. I think that's why I chose it. It's kind of the combination of, it's got that tragic element and that really touching element, but it's just got so many good choices in the storytelling, both the art and the writing, and for that matter, the coloring, inking, all of it right on down the line. It's really well done.
Mm-hmm. Well, and since you mentioned that, before I go back to some other things I have in my notes, the quality of the art, and I'm sorry, not the quality, the inspiration. I'm not quite sure what word I'm trying to go for here, but what was amazing about what Friends and Austin did is that it looks an awful lot like Steve Ditko came back and did this story. And I was curious what you thought of that, them trying to emulate Ditko in this way.
Well, I thought it was a really great choice, because I think it makes it a more human, vulnerable, more down to earth story than taking from Romita Senior, say, really going for that skinny kid but older, growing up a bit more. But I think that's a wise choice. And then, given the fact that It also has within it Spider-Man's origin story, which was drawn by Steve Ditko. It really feels all of a piece and feels like there's sort of a straight line between the origin story and this story, in the sense that there in the origin story, Spider-Man was asked he was asked to help when there was the burglar running by, and he didn't bother. And in this case, he has learned from that, and he has responded to Conover's call to help. And in a difficult situation, because it's not easy to go into to be in the presence of a kid who is going to pass on so soon. I mean, it's a difficult thing to keep your composure and be there for them. That's not necessarily an easy thing. It's not life threatening in the way a lot of Spider-Man's missions are, but it's a difficult one, and it's one where you've got to be vulnerable in that. And I mean, mind you, with this story, we didn't know that it was a call for help that he was heeding until the end, which is an interesting thing. Whereas in the origin story, it's quite clear that, okay, this police officer's asking him, hey, help, stop this burglar and whatever. But nonetheless, in both cases, there is a call for help, and he has grown and learned and heeded that, and doesn't ignore those calls now, and has a responsibility as Spider-Man to do what he can. And in this case, what he can do is he can't save this kid's life any more than he was able to save Uncle Ben's, because of, his negligence in that case. But anyway, I'm going on and on here, but it does fit, like it all. But Dick, like having the Ditko art choice, or the Ditko-esque art choice in this case, it does fit well with the origin, and the origin fits well with this story as well.
Yeah, yeah. And when to your point, you have that through line of Peter Parker feeling powerless to stop something so impactful, and it may not be as impactful to him, or Tim's story may not, but the fact that Tim looks up to him, and I idolizes him, collects him in that sense. It you can see that there is a connection there, and I love how you compared that to the original story. And I agree with you that evoking Ditko in this way really does drive that home. And given, and like I said, this is one of my favorite Spider-Man stories in my collection, despite the fact that it is basically an origin retelling told in a different and much more meaningful way. But still, it's here's how Spider-Man got started. These are his powers. Here's the web shooters. Aren't these cool? Things like that. But it's told in such an innovative, or at least interesting way. And so I really like it for that.
Right, absolutely. This could be, just as Amazing Fantasy 15 was the first Spider-Man story. This could easily serve as someone's first Spider-Man story, and tell them everything they needed to know, and tell them more even than Amazing Fantasy 15 would, because obviously we've got what happens after. We've got all the stuff with Jameson and everything else, and him being a photographer that takes pictures of himself as Spider-Man. All that stuff is in here too. And I did think it was really great how they did fit in a demonstration of all the things that Spider-Man can do really economically. He starts out, he's on the up on the wall, and he lifts the bed, and he shoots his webs and talks about spider sense. And so everything that he can do, and everything that he's about, and what motivates him, and what his secret identity, all of it is there in this story, and fit in really organically, essentially.
Yes. Yeah. You mentioned economically, and that is, to me, one of the most amazing things about this particular story is how much they put in 11 pages retelling the origin, demonstrating Spider-Man, for lack of a better phrase, and incorporating this sad story of this kid and what is intimated that is going to happen to him, right? And
Right.
so it's just I would I'm at a loss for words for it. Apparently, I would find it hard to find many stories that do comic book storytelling and an origin story at that so well as this does.
Right. And they don't even skimp on the details of his collecting this stuff, because it talks about, oh yeah, no, so there was an aunt or whatever, grandma or whoever it was, or somebody kept all these clippings, and my cousin whoever took pictures of him, and I dug these out of here, and I went to the TV station and got this film. Like, it's got all these details about his how he came upon all this stuff collecting wise as a collector. So it tells you also about him as what he's doing collecting too. He fits that in there, in addition to all the rest. And I think that is also really smart in fitting all those details in there and fitting in the variety of things that he has collected, because what you think as various things are revealed to him about Spider-Man, all that you think is going to be revealed about Tim is more either ways that he got something or things that he got. You don't, your eye is so much on the collects part of it, and there's enough variety there that really keeps you thinking about that. And I thought, honestly, the above all else, in terms of the great detail of the collection, were those bullets. I mean, that was fantastic, because number one, it really does show him going really above and beyond. This isn't just clippings. He's actually taking these bullets out of walls, or on a building, out of whatever, and bringing them home. But the other thing that does is, what with we've seen Uncle Ben get shot by bullets. We see Spider-Man dodging bullets. We see him having these bullets, and it kind of just reinforces that that's, generally speaking, how that's the type of way that people come to harm in Spider-Man's world, and in his around him, is things like that. And so it kind of primes us subtly to not be thinking about any, not certainly not be thinking about some invisible disease like cancer being something that's going to do somebody in around Spider-Man, because the bullets sort of reinforce that too. In addition to showing Tim's devotion to his collecting, and in his resourcefulness, and all that stuff, and just variety of what he's got. So it works in a lot of ways.
Definitely, definitely. So Troy, I was very I'm very impressed with how you're connecting this story to Spider-Man's original appearance in Amazing Fantasy 15. In fact, I had at one point when I was doing my notes, I thought I should go back and reread that and compare some of the imagery and some of the information to see how much the creative team on this particular story pulled from the original source material. And but I ran out of time. So now I'm gonna, after I get done talking with you, I'm gonna go back and reread Amazing Fantasy 15 and do a comparison there, because there's that was some great connections you made to that material. So I thank you for that. That was a highlight of this conversation so far.
Oh well, yeah, no, it's great. I mean, I love those connections, and I one thing that I looked up and discovered was that they're both 11 pages. Apparently,
Oh my gosh! Wow.
they're both the same length, and they both have the big different emotional gut punches on the very last page, actually, because very last page of the origin of Amazing Fantasy 15 story is him discovering, oh, I could have stopped this guy. I could have prevented this. And that's actually on the very last page that he discovers that.
Wow.
And the final image for each of them has a very small Spider-Man figure. In Amazing Fantasy 15, it's a small Spider-Man walking away, kind of, it's got a kind of a slump posture. He's walking away.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the last panel of this story, it's a small Spider-Man figure, but swinging away in this case. So I think that that does speak to the different endings, in the sense that there is the bittersweetness of this story, where he has done all he can do. He knows he's done his very best in this situation, versus the origin story, where he knows that he has not, that it's an entirely, that, I mean, okay, he stopped the burglar, and he did manage to stop the burglar, but too late to save his uncle. So it's one of those cases where the amount of success that he had in the origin, he had some, but it just is dwarfed by the failure there.
Yeah, the tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder, this when the story continues, the next day when he wakes up, does Peter feel a little less guilty that he was able to help this kid? Like you said, it's a very very similar, at least emotionally, it's a very similar situation. And like you said, he was able to address it. He had an opportunity to help someone that needed his help directly. So that would be. I wonder if they ever. I don't think they did. I was trying to look this up. I don't know that they ever returned to this, other than I do have this. His death is mentioned. Tim's death is mentioned in a Spider-Man carol, in which Spider-Man meets Tim's brother Joey, and that was published in the 1991 Marvel Holiday Special. I don't know if you've ever read that. I've not.
I have not. No, haven't read that one either.
So yeah,
No.
I'm gonna go have to see if that's on Marvel Unlimited. So I can read that as well.
Yeah.
So, and that was by Danny Fingeroth and Ron Garney on that particular story. Oh, and
Okay.
also it was adapted in the 1994 animated Spider-Man series, in an episode called Make a Wish, which I've also not seen.
Also not seen. Also
Yeah.
not seen. Now I read somewhere, now I might be entirely wrong, that there was a girl and not a boy in that story. Though like similar otherwise, perhaps, but I don't know.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure.
Speaking out of speaking out of, oh, I thought I saw something or heard something out of the corner of a ear or eye or whatever, but
Well, yeah, I mean, this, like I said before, given that this was part of an assistant editors month event at Marvel, and
mm,
for those that may not realize what that is, assistant editors month was I think the brainchild of Shooter, perhaps. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it was the assistant editors would take over each of their respective books that month, and basically hilarity would ensue for the most part.
right,
And this particular comic book was one of the rare ones where they didn't try to do like a parody or some zany story involving the characters, but it was the editor Dana Tell. He asked the creative teams to highlight an important facet of the web slinger's legend. I mean, that's a pretty tall order for an assistant editor to ask these. With I think we think of them now as somewhat legendary. Roger
absolutely,
Stern and Terry Austin and John Romita Jr. and Ron Frenz, right? These are
hmm
all legends now. Whether they were legends then, maybe Roger Stern out of that bunch
right, yeah, yeah,
at that
yeah,
time, right? But then this is in the letter column where we get that information from the assistant editor, and the facet of the first story with Thunderball was, action. Spider-Man is an action superhero, and he felt that came across really well with that
hmm
story. And then this one, he said he called it. Dana Tao called it one of the most touching stories I've ever read.
Well, I agree. I agree with that, and it's it does highlight an ongoing aspect of Spider-Man stories, which is the which was there from the beginning in terms of Uncle Ben's death, and then you mentioned the death of Gwen Stacy. There's also the death of Captain Stacy and Jean DeWolf and others that I'm not even thinking of. And there was a point in time when, well, I mean, there was a point in time when it did look like Aunt May had died, and then that particular one was reversed. But it certainly looked like it had happened at a certain point, or a couple of points actually. But it is one of those things where it's that sort of Peter Parker luck and that burden that and the death that seems to follow him periodically. And wasn't there something in Dan Slott's run where he said like it's so a part of the Spider-Man lore that Spider-Man declared nobody else is dying or something like that. I can't remember the exact wording, but I seem to remember seeing a page that referenced that referenced sort of the number of people that he had not managed to save or who had passed on around him, almost like it was a curse of a sort.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, he seems to be cursed, for lack of a better word, in terms of the people around him. It's a wonder that Mary Jane hasn't ended up on the chopping block more often.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, I hesitate to jokingly say, but it's almost like, hey,
Right? Yeah.
good news, Peter. You've got a fan who collects everything, loves you. Whatever bad news, sorry, they're about to die. Because of you're cursed. I'm sorry, but it does fit in with an aspect of Spider-Man, like you say, of obviously an action hero. Lots of zipping around, swinging around, fighting, punching, beating the odds, all that kind of stuff. But there is that darker side to it all, and the price of that life of action seems to be he can't always save everyone, or can't always save who he wants to save.
Hmm.
All cases, which is a really a realistic Marvel type approach to things, and certainly set him apart back in when Spider-Man first came around, when the DC heroes, I'm sure, never failed or never permanently failed like that. So that was a more realistic take of like, well, no, I mean, you're not always going to be able to save everyone. That's just not going to happen every time out.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Especially with Spider-Man.
Well, yeah, no, um, and this is going on a little bit of a different tangent, but I was looking at the whole revealing his secret identity aspect to this, and there is, of course, the standard reason which he gives, that puts others at risk if his identity is out there and so forth. But in this particular case, I mean, there is certainly another reason for Peter not wanting to take that mask off, because tough to hold yourself together in that situation. You know the situation, the kid knows the situation, and to look him in the eye, face to face, no mask, no anything between you. Part of why you'd want to keep that mask on is because you probably have a hard time keeping it together. And I mean, obviously, as we see when he hugs Tim, he does have that tear coming down his face, and he gets that mask on quick afterwards.
Yeah.
And so it's just there again, the economy of the whole thing, where it's like there are multiple reasons why he wants to keep the mask on, or at least not have it off for all that long. And we don't even know all of that until the final page there. And I also liked, in terms of, it's not really an unmasking, it's an ungloving of his hand to show the web shooters, but it kind of foreshadows like a later unmasking, though. It's like kind of an easy level to do it, where it's okay, I'm going to take this is concealing my hand, I'm going to take that off and show this cool gadget I've got and whatever. But it's kind of an interesting, it doesn't foreshadow the unmasking exactly, but it's an interesting companion to it, because it's sort of where Spider-Man wants to be in this meeting. Like he wants to put on the best show he can and kind of keep it light and keep it, a bit more surface in a way, but he wants to really, he's almost more back to being that TV performer, but with a good heart though,
Hmm.
doing it for a good reason. And it's sort of Tim that kind of in his questions, whatever, sometimes will sometimes pull things into a deeper spot than Peter necessarily was comfortable going initially. But then, Tim's quite capable of lightening it up too, because he sort of sees how bummed out Peter is after telling the story of Uncle Ben and everything, and sort of says, "Hey, look, I've got these clippings of all these retractions. Aren't these funny?" So I mean, he kind of also can lighten the mood as well.
Well, and to your point, I think, like the ungloving and then the unmasking, that's Peter really being vulnerable.
Hmm.
Given everything that's gone on since the beginning, and all the people that he has lost up to this point, to open himself up, to have that kind of intimate connection in that way, one is very impactful emotionally, but also just to show a little bit about how he's grown as well as a person, even though he was really reluctant at first to do so. And that is just from years and years of guarding his secrets so adamantly, that, so because he doesn't want people to get hurt, the people
Right.
that are in his life to get hurt if the secret gets out. But he's able to bypass that in this particular situation. And then two, how strong of a human being is Tim in this situation? He
Hmm.
knows, he's 9 years old. He's not stupid. He
Yeah.
knows he has leukemia. The chances are not good. I don't know, it's not really said if how much Tim understands about his condition, despite the fact that the reporter, which is Jacob Conover, is the person with the byline in this, reveals it to all the Daily Bugle readers.
Hmm.
But here he is comforting his idol
Yeah. Yeah.
and giving him encouragement at the earlier in the story. And this I just can't get over the courage and strength of Tim Harrison in this situation.
No, very true. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That he has that wherewithal to say, yeah, you're being too hard on yourself. You have made up for it since. And certainly he was continuing to make up for it right at that particular moment as well. And another thing that I really like about this story is that so many tales that have a big twist, you think when you look back at them and you go, oh, but why didn't they say X? If they had said, they would have said X or Y, or they would have done X or Y or whatever. But in this case, it is perfectly natural and organic that neither of these two want to talk directly about the illness, and
Yeah.
whatever Tim may know about the prognosis, but neither of them want to talk directly about that. So there's like a perfectly good reason why they don't say anything about it, whereas a lot of things that have a twist where it's like, well, they would have said something about whatever it happens to be that's revealed later on. But in this case, no, they absolutely wouldn't have. It's an elephant in the room that
Yeah.
they don't want that intruding on this connection that they're having at this time. That the connection is the important thing there.
Yeah, and Spider-Man himself does the same thing with Tim, even though we see it because we're getting the imagery of the situation with Uncle Ben, but Spider-Man doesn't tell him that. It's just that it's this vague thing that something happened to someone I cared about. So
Right.
I think that mirrors the two situations mirror each other very well.
Yeah. And some of the phrasing, of course, is wonderful, especially when you look back at it. Tim saying that he wouldn't never tell anyone as long as he lived, and things like that, which hit you so much harder later, knowing what you know later on. So there's lines that work so well in retrospect like that. But even when he asks Spider-Man about his secret identity, he doesn't put it that way. He says, "Will you show me who you really are?" And I love that phrasing. I love that phrasing. He doesn't say, "What's your secret identity? Tell me your secret identity." It's not, no, will you, because, I mean, that's just so resonant. It's so much more resonant. Will you show me who you really are? Because there again, that's speaking to that next level of vulnerability. That, and it's not that Tim's intending it to speak to that, but I mean, but it just does. And then when Spider-Man leaves, he does not say goodbye. He says, "Take care of yourself," which is a much, a much softer way of leaving, I guess,
Hmm.
too, with layout, with a lot less finality. And like in the care of the words, even going right into the title where it says "the kid who collects Spider-Man." Now, mind you, that's the title of the article, and the article is written in the present tense because it's written while Tim is still around, of course. But I think it's because it's often, the title is often misquoted and missaid, and it has been by me in the past. "The kid who collected Spider-Man."
Yes. And it's funny you say that, because when I first started writing out my notes, that's exactly
Mhm.
what I put in as the title of this thing. I'm like, oh wait, no, no, no. And then speaking of that, I was reading some articles that people have written over the years about this story, and that is
Mhm.
one of the points that they brought up. And I don't remember who exactly it was now. I don't have that in my notes for some reason, but it was the title "collect," using the present tense, collects, was
Mhm.
very much a particular choice because they didn't want to give it away by the title.
Yep. Yeah. So it's just so well thought out, and I even like the in terms of its beginning, how, okay, you've got Spider-Man. First, he's up in the corner, on the sort of on the ceiling in the corner, and then he sort of drops down and skitters under the bed, and Tim's like, "Well, where did he go?" or whatever. And it's like a spider. It's like you've spotted it's like you've spotted a spider up in the up. I've had this happen. You spot a spider up somewhere. Oh, suddenly they drop, and then where are they now? Who knows
Yeah.
where they've gotten to, and you're kind of wondering, where are they? And so I don't know. I mean, even just little things like that, and even like his posture dropping down is very spider-like and whatever. And there's just so many little either wording choices or visual choices. And I guess also, speaking of the visual choices, is as economical as this is, it also really has lots of room to breathe too. I mean, it's a good thing it wasn't condensed into fewer pages than this, because that would have taken a lot of that out. But certainly, well, I think the original the original sort of not exactly script, but like Marvel style script, in terms of like a description of what was happening and said, was about 2 pages, and now this is 11. But I mean, Friends has really given certain points the room to breathe that they really need. And I mean, obviously, Stern in his writing has indicated that that room is needed as well. But it really doesn't feel squished at all. It feels like it is exactly the length it needs to be, which is not, not too long, not any shorter, not any longer. It just feels like this is the length it should be.
Yeah. To your point about some of the art too, I was just looking through the pages, and the part where we see his, the very beginning of his origin, where he gets bit by the spider and he starts to climb up the wall, and he has the spider strength, right? When Spider-Man is describing the situation, we see Peter Parker in the past doing these things, except his head, his face is all blacked out to evoke the fact
Yeah.
that he's not revealing who he is. I just thought, that's just a wonderful creative choice.
Really great creative choice. Really great, because and there again, it serves a couple of purposes, because it does serve the exact purpose that you're saying, is that he's not revealing who he is to Tim, and that visually reinforces that. And also, it saves Pete's face until he actually unmasks.
Exactly. Yeah. Saving that big
That impact.
reveal. Yeah.
Yep. And what I also love too, about the identity reveal is, in this case, it is actually someone that Tim is familiar with, at least familiar with their work, familiar with their photos.
Hmm.
Whereas a lot of times, who would know? Who would, like, he could be unmasked by someone, and he's unconscious, and somebody unmasks him. We're like, who's this? But in this case, I mean, mind you, it's partly because Peter gives him that extra bit of context that I did take those photos and so forth. But I just think it's really cool that he's revealing his secret identity because it is a super fan of Spider-Man. That identity actually means something to him as well. It's like, oh yeah, all these pictures. It
In
turns
a
out that
different way. Yeah.
in a different way. It turns out, oh, I've got my clippings. Little did I know, they actually have, in a certain way, double the amount of Spider-Man content in this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Makes his collection all the richer than it was before the mask was taken off, which is
Hmm.
kind of a lovely little lovely little treat for him as well.
So you had mentioned Roger Stern earlier. I forget what the context was, but you, in our email conversation back and forth preparing for this discussion, you had mentioned that there was a story behind Stern's story, and in fact, mentioning Superman. Did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, apparently, the idea for the story came to him in a dream, and it came so fully formed that he was worried. Oh, I'm just remembering. I'm remembering something similar. I vaguely remember a Superman story that might have done something like this. So he was concerned, and he asked around about that, and nobody could think of any comparable Superman story, and so that was that, and he got the go ahead to do it. And my theory is that Superman story did exist, and it might have been Action Comics 457, in which Pete Ross's son is endangered by a disease and his lack of will to live. So Superman tries to give, it's John Ross is the name, what he most wants to know, reveals a secret identity. But in this case, apparently, John won't believe that Superman really is Clark Kent, which I think is a nice little twist as well. That really, that guy, Clark Kent, is Superman, the hero of millions. I don't think it certainly doesn't sound like it's anywhere near as emotionally impactful as this, and certainly not as well remembered, given that when Stern asked around, nobody did remember this one to say, hey, it was done in that, something similar ish in a way was done in that issue. So anyway, that's my guess. It's the closest thing I could find that
Hmm.
Stern might have run across and read, and then thought, oh, there is something like that, maybe.
Yeah, but yeah, I agree with you. Certainly not, because when you mentioned that Action Comics issue, I went and looked it up and breezed through it just to get a sense for it. And that story certainly doesn't have the pathos that this story does. And certainly not the impact, despite the
No.
fact that it's a Superman issue. But yeah, that and despite I mean, there is a similarity between John Ross and Tim Harrison in a sense,
Sure.
between the
Yeah.
two stories. So I think your theory is pretty spot on. I also have this other quote from Stern talking about the story. He said, "Partly, I'm sure." About the story that it sprang from a desire on my part to do a short human interest story in the style of Will Eisner. That's why the story is partially advanced through newspaper clippings. I was trying to be Eisner-esque, and this is from a interview he did that was posted on spiderfan.org.
Well, he channeled it well and put it to great use, because the newspaper story, I mean, the writing in that newspaper story is excellent in and of itself. And it gets obviously a lot of key information out, in particular at the very beginning and very end. But it also again, like I say, it gives that background to Tim's collecting, which is certainly interesting. It makes it feel more real, and it's just a nice transition point because I noticed it was he had the newspaper clipping in between Spider-Man feeling down after he had talked about Uncle Ben's death. And then Stern uses the newspaper clipping to introduce the Retractions album, and then we get into that visually, which is them sitting down which I love that image of them sitting down together and laughing over the album full of J. Jonah Jameson's Retractions. But it's a nice visual kind of a leap where you have the one long panel where Spider-Man's quite distant looking out the window type of thing, and then you've got that block of newspaper, and then the next thing the mood is changed, and you're able to have that kind of transition because you've got that the content of that stretch of article, but you've also got that real estate that the article takes up as well to give you the mood change, which I think really works well.
Well, and also slows your story experience down a little bit so that
Hmm.
you can, you can savor it a little bit more as opposed to just breezing through from one panel to the next. And so again, it goes back to that the economy of style and the 11 pages that they have, and they have so much background and information to pass along and tell a good story at the same time, that using those clippings, besides trying to be like Eisner, was a really good storytelling choice.
Really good because that's exactly bang on that you spend more time. You spend more time with Spider-Man and Tim and so forth, and that allows this story to have more impact because you have spent that time. You've got a bit of a richer sense of some of the background. It's a great point. That it's really key to slowing it down because honestly, yeah, if you don't have that and you just breeze through the 11 pages, I don't think you'd have the impact. Not as much anyway.
And it certainly wouldn't still, at least for us, and maybe the people of our age who originally bought this issue back in '83 or '84, that that it does to this day. And so you said something earlier that made me think, you know what, this is probably a perfect comic book story, one of the few, one of the rare ones.
Yeah, I could go there. I because I can't think of, and it's been so long. So much time has passed, and I've learned so much more about how stories are constructed, comic stories and other whatever other types of stories, and in all that time, in all that 40 years of me growing and changing and encountering more stories, I still don't come to this finding anything that I would change. And that's such a rare thing. I mean, there's usually with any story, I can usually find something that I might go, oh, this little thing here, tweak that or whatever. But I can't. I found myself, as I think it's pretty clear, I found myself quite the opposite, finding, oh, that's a neat trick that in terms of how that works and how that works and how that goes with that and so forth. I was finding so much of that I'm at a loss to think of what I might change. I mean, there may be something, I suppose, if I really think hard, there might be something, and I'm sure the I imagine the creators themselves may be able to think of something that they might a word or two or a little bit of visual or whatever. But I saw an interview with Ron Friends about it, where his thought on it was that it's one of those rare stories where the finished product, every aspect of it, lived up to what certainly in terms of all the art, it lived up to what his intentions were for what he was trying to get across, and then sort of went beyond that in some cases. So because again, most stories that people are involved in, they can usually think of, a few things that they might change or tweak here and there. But I'm actually almost filibustering trying to think of one here, but because I don't know, how comfortable I am going, that's perfect.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I get that.
Yeah, because I'm of the mind that, oh, there's got to be something, and like I say, there may very well be, but I think it's whatever minor things could be changed to enhance things even more are so minuscule compared to all the things that it does so well.
Okay. So, Troy, I was curious, did you have anything else to say about this gem of a story?
Well, the only other thing that I can think of is that I do like how it plays fair with the reader throughout, and in particular, how it at the very end starts to really hint that things are off a little bit with once you hit the secret identity reveal, because generally speaking, no matter how big a fan a kid is, Spider-Man probably would have stuck with his tried and true answer, and tried and true for a reason. Tried and true because it is true. The reason of he doesn't want to put anyone at risk by revealing his identity. He probably would have stuck with that. And so the reader's curiosity, I think, at that point is kind of tweaked by, well, wait, why is this different? Because even if Tim is really sincere in his promise in that moment not to reveal it, those type of promises from kids just aren't that trustworthy, because kids don't necessarily fully understand what they're promising. They don't really get how, over a span of time, how tempting it might be to reveal whatever secret it is, or what circumstances there may be that would reward you in whatever way to reveal it, or whatever it may be. It's tougher to keep a secret, especially of that magnitude, than you might think. And especially given the fact that up to that point in the story, in terms of how much we know, I mean, he's told this reporter an awful lot about Spider-Man. So you just kind of look at it and go, that seems odd that Spider-Man's going to have that much trust in this kid, even as sincere and trustworthy as he is. It just seems a little off and a little odd, and as it kind of should, and does hint at something different going on, perhaps. On the other hand, if anyone could keep a secret as monumental as that, well, it may very well be a super fan of someone who could. And that's sort of that's kind of, in a way, what you how, at least for me, I think when I was initially reading it, answered that to myself too, was, yeah, well, he's that much into Superman, I should say Spider-Man, and the heroic ideal that Spider-Man represents, all that stuff, that he would keep it, I suppose. But it does make you wonder, Spider-Man trusting that would be the case for, as Timothy says, forever and ever, that would be the case. Again, because kids don't always realize how tough it is to keep some of the promises they might make in the moment. So it plays really fair there, that kind of makes you suspect of it. And then in particular, when you see Peter's face and the tear, you think that is also very strange in this moment. So I do like that, how almost as it's just simultaneously kind of unmasking in a way, because at the point in time in particular, like Spider-Man and Peter Parker unmasking himself, the story is starting to unmask itself fully at that point, starting to.
Yeah, good point.
That's the moment of that, and I really like how fair it plays in that moment, where that's how it would play out even as odd as it sort of seems at that particular moment when you're looking at it.
Hmm. Well, and given that you're talking about that point in the story, I'll just add too, there, and you read this as part of the synopsis, when Tim says, "But I never tell another soul that I knew, long as I lived,"
Yeah,
which is you normally wouldn't say it that way, and you'd say, "As long as I live," and his face in this panel is
yeah,
downcast and sad looking,
yep.
and so you get it. They are giving some pointers in the direction before you get to the reveal at the end, but it's so subtle and so wonderfully drafted that it's really you don't really catch on unless you're really good at picking up on these things, which I was not when I first read this.
No, me neither. I didn't see it coming at all. And it's almost that point too is very near the point when the way he's saying it and the way he's looking and everything else. I mean, it's yeah, it does really come close, much closer to the point of, well, not saying I'm not going to have to keep it for for as long as some people would have to keep it. He's not like, you know what I mean? It's not saying that, and he's not wanting to say that, but it's in but you can see that it potentially is in that's in his mind.
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
and 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 Spider-Man also, of course, can't address that either. It's there between them, but it's sort of yeah. So I thought that was really, like the rest of it was well done. But that, I don't know if I've got anything else. I think we've covered a lot of ground on an 11 page
Yeah, exactly.
11-page backup story. We've definitely it's given us a lot to talk about, and there again, I think that speaks to why it is such a well regarded and well loved story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And in fact, it has inspired me to read more Spider-Man. Mostly, I want to go back and read some earlier stuff, not necessarily the stuff that's being published right now, but it got me hankering for reading more Spider-Man comic books that I have not had that feeling for a while. I mean, the last time I got excited about reading Spider-Man was when Spider-Man wasn't Spider-Man; he was Doctor Octopus.
I really enjoyed that storyline. I enjoyed that one too. I didn't read it as it was coming out, but at the same time, I wasn't that far behind it, and I read the collections. Didn't have I avoided miraculously avoided spoilers on it, so I only had the vaguest ideas about how it wrapped up, and I really enjoyed that storyline a lot. I agree with you.
Are there any other favorite, just real quick, any other favorite Spider-Man stories off the top of your head?
Well, going to death again here. I do really like Craven's Last Hunt a
Yeah,
lot,
that's a good one.
and it's a good one, and I that was another one that I bought off the stands as it was coming out. There are lighter ones that I of course enjoy as well. I think there was a Peter David one where he's the commuter cometh, where he's got to go into the suburbs, and he's kind of a fish out of water pursuing, I forget who he's pursuing going there, but you don't have the tall buildings to swing on or whatever. It's almost like Batman, like your darker kind of Batman figure having to run around in the daytime in his costume type of thing. It was sort of had that feel to it, where it's like Spider-Man, okay, he's out in the suburbs now, and he's kind of out of his element, and I think at one point he tries to, I think he might try to swing on a tree that he kind of breaks or something. And anyway, that was a fun little story, that much lighter than the ones mentioned thus far. How about yourself?
Well, like I said, I have not read much Spider-Man. aside from like the Spider Verse, some of the Spider Verse collections in the last few years. But I will say I was really impressed. Speaking of, Peter Parker angst and and the curse. I recently read the House of M miniseries from many years ago,
Hmm.
and the Spider-Man part of that was the best part of that story to me.
Okay.
What
Okay.
what he had to go through in that alternate universe, and then coming out of it when he realizes what he had and then what he lost, just that the anger and anguish that Peter feels, it was really palpable to me. So I that one I particularly enjoyed. So if you missed that because it was a Marvel event, but you're a Spider-Man fan, boy, I recommend that.
I'll definitely give that a look. That sounds great. Sounds right up my alley. It sounds reminiscent of that Superman for the man who has everything,
Yes, yeah, you're right.
which I love. I mean that's fantastic. So I mean it being reminiscent of that story is a big plus in my book.
And I want to make sure it's not the House of M Spider-Man miniseries. It's the main event book that had the Spider-Man stuff in it. So because I read that Spider-Man mini tie-in, and it wasn't as good.
Okay. All right.
But yeah, there you go.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, Troy, thank you for one suggesting that we talk about this half issue story, because it was just such a delight to revisit it after 40 years and discover there's so much to it. It's like there's so many comics in my collection that I read once and they've been sitting in my comic boxes for decades. And I'm doing these my comics history episodes recently, and that's causing me to go back and look at these older things that I've never talked about on the show before,
Right.
and rediscover things about them, either good or bad. But it's been so much fun, and this is along the same lines. But I get to have a great conversation with somebody else about it instead of just talking to myself. So I really appreciate that. And is I you have some wonderful children's books. I mentioned Perfect Man, Hat Cat. We talked about in that July 2022 episode, which are really great stories that you've done. I imagine you've got some other stuff in the works that you want to talk about.
I do have other stuff in the works. One thing that I will mention that I'm really happy with, it was a late development in 2023, was I finally got my website to a place where I actually like it and where I'm happy to go, hey, go here. So it's Troy, Troy, troystory.ca. Instead of Toy Story, it's troystory.ca for Canada. Anyway, there's all kinds of stuff there in terms of both the other books that I've done, but also I've written a ton of stories for kids magazines, and a lot of them, or most of them, in fact, are for magazines that are only available in Canada. But the good news is there are links there to where some of them have been read aloud.
Ah, yeah.
So there can be some access to folks who are not here in Canada to those stories. That's sort of one of the things I was messing about with near the end of the year, and I'm really happy that I did. But beyond that, speaking of those stories, those kids magazine stories, in April there's going to be a story appearing in Chickadee magazine, again a Canadian magazine, but who knows, maybe there at some point might be a link where that one's read aloud. And it's I love writing fractured fairy tales or fairy tale mashups, that kind of thing. And this one has got it's got Red Riding Hood in it, Jack and the Beanstalk in it, and Three Little Pigs, and a very misunderstood wolf in this case. And it's just so much fun. So I'm really excited that one will be coming out for those that will be able to see it. And other things that too soon to say anything about at this moment, but
Okay.
yeah, definitely keeping busy though. Definitely keeping busy.
Well, you'll have to let us know once you do have something to announce, so we can point people to that. While you were talking there, I went ahead and went to your website, and yeah, it looks great. I like how you have it organized, and all the books listed on the homepage there. So yeah, people should check that out. Of course, I will have links in the show notes as well. Troy, is all of your social media stuff still the same as it was? And maybe you just want to just tell the fine folks in case they want to follow you and learn more about your work.
Right. Yeah. On Twitter/X/ whatever it might be called by the time this drops, if it still exists, who knows what's going on there. I am at Troy Story 2, and that's TOO at the end, Troy Story 2. And I believe, I'm trying to think what I am on. I'm on Blue Sky as well, but I can't remember if the handle's the same or not on that one. But I'm on both of those mainly, and sort of splitting my time between the two. And I've actually been, I think the last time we talked, I might have mentioned, I'm thinking about cutting back on social media. I really should cut back on why I have not been successful in that. Not up to this point. I've been pretty active, though. Who knows? I may cut a little bit of time back here and there, but I'll still remain pretty active regardless, I think.
Yeah, and like I said, I will have all these links in the show notes. I'll go find the Blue Sky link and add that as well.
Fantastic.
All right. Again, Troy, thank you so much. Like I said, for suggesting this and then having this discussion with me. It's been a lot of fun. And if people would like to, contact either of us, you could do it directly to Troy in the manners that he has described, or you can also just send me email at longboxreview@gmail.com, or you can just leave comments at the website longboxreview.com. And with that, I think we're done, Troy. And thank you, listeners, for listening. And we will talk to you again some other time. Bye-bye.